Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond COVID, the new podcast from Compassion in Politics, where we try to take a step back from the horror and heartbreak of the current crisis to ask, what are we learning from it about how we all live? Can we build back better after the crisis? And what opportunities does it provide to do things differently? My name is Jennifer Nadel, and my co-host is
Matt Hawkins, and today we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Kristin Neff. Kristin is Associate Professor of Educational Psychology at the University of Texas and the author of the book Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. She has also co-developed an empirically supported training program called Mindful Self-Compassion and is in the process of writing a new book, Fierce Compassion. Welcome to the show, Kristin. And how are you coping during the lockdown?
Personally, I'm well, but I'm also very privileged. I realize that, I can work from home. I've got resources. I'm in comfort. Clearly, I think everyone is worried, not only about the people suffering now, but what could come from this. So I'm just trying to keep some equanimity, just, take it day by day. So personally, I'm doing okay. Thank you.
Great. Now, if I could start with kind of asking you to set out your stall. What is self-compassion and how is it different to self-esteem?
Well, so actually, in a time like this, it's really clear how it's different than self-esteem. Self-esteem is pretty much just about judging yourself positively, thinking that, you're a competent person, maybe that you're attractive, that people like you, that, on a scale of 1 to 5, you're toward the top of the scale. It's really a type of evaluation. And the thing about self-esteem is it tends to be contingent. It's either contingent on being special and above average. How do I compare to other people? Am I better? Am I smarter? Am I prettier? Am I more successful? La, la, la. Or it's contingent on success, right? So the things we value, like let's say work or, if you're a businessman or an athlete or something like that, our self-esteem is contingent on being successful at those domains of life we value. Then when we don't succeed, it tends to desert us. So self-compassion is not about evaluation. It's just about treating oneself with kindness, care, concern, and support that you naturally show to a good friend. So there's a sense of self-worth to self-compassion, right? It's kind of the idea that all human beings are worthy of compassion, but it's not contingent on success. It's not contingent on anything other than being a flawed human being, which is the type of thing that pretty much everyone can fulfill. So for instance, in a time like this with the COVID crisis, self-esteem is perhaps not that relevant, but self-compassion is hugely relevant. In terms of can we pause, can we acknowledge the difficulty we're going through, can we give ourselves support, kindness, warmth, can we remind ourselves of our connection with everyone else? This is really where self-compassion shows its mettle, so to speak.
And what are the measurable benefits of self-compassion?
So there's a huge research literature on self-compassion now. If you go to Google Scholar, there are over 2,500 studies with self-compassion in the title. And so we know that it's really strongly linked to well-being, right? So people who are either score more self-compassionate on a scale I created, or have been trained to be more self-compassionate, or who are put in a self-compassionate frame of mind, what this mindset does is it, first of all, helps us be happier, more satisfied with our lives, more hopeful, more motivated. It also decreases things like feelings of stress or anxiety or shame or depression. And it's not only good for mental well-being, but also physical well-being, we're finding out, right? Because the mind and body are connected. So people who are more self-compassionate, first of all, they take better care of their bodies because they care about themselves. So they exercise more, they eat right. They also have fewer physical health problems. They've got better immune function, for instance. So it seems to help both the body and the mind.
And how much harder is it to practice that self-compassion in the face of a crisis like the one we're in the midst of now?
Well, so the irony of this pandemic is that normally when something happens, let's say a health problem, maybe you get diagnosed with a health condition or something, there's a kind of irrational feeling of something has gone wrong, as if everyone else is living a perfectly normal problem-free life and it's just me who's having this issue, right? And it's not logical, but we kind of fall into the trap of thinking it's just me. And when we do that, it usually makes it a lot worse, because not only are we struggling, we feel all alone in our struggles. And so with the pandemic, even though ironically we're being physically isolated, we're in our homes, we aren't really, allowed to have as much interaction as we normally would, it's more difficult to fall into that egocentric trap of thinking it's just me, because clearly it's the whole planet, right? And so it's definitely a time for self-compassion. Instead of just focusing on, do you have enough toilet paper or do you have your supplies? It's really important that we pause and try to give ourselves warmth and feelings of support and care. But it's also a kind of strange opportunity to help us see our connection with others, and also to have insight into our interdependence. We can really see how interdependent the world is. You break one part of the global supply chain and everything else is effective. And I think normally we don't have insight into that as easily as we can see that now.
And how does self-compassion relate to our experience to be compassionate towards others? Because some may argue that it can make us a little bit self-obsessed, prioritizing ourselves above those who may be in greater need.
Yeah, so it really doesn't work that way at all. So first of all, most people are naturally a lot more compassionate to others than they are to themselves. So the two don't always go hand in hand. But what we know is if you train someone to be more self-compassionate, they become more compassionate to others. And really importantly, especially now with this crisis, it allows us to sustain being compassionate for others. So for instance, we just finished up a study of healthcare workers. We created a self-compassion program for them. And not only did it increase their compassion for others, it actually reduced their levels of burnout and stress. And so, the idea that we are either compassionate to others or ourselves is really a fallacy, right? In fact, when you criticize yourself and you beat yourself up and you wallow in shame, in those moments, you aren't exactly able, you don't have the emotional resources to think about other people's needs, right? And so the more resources you give to yourself, the more you're able to meet your own needs, to stay calm, to stay stable. First of all, not only do you have more energetic resources to give to others, every single person you interact with is interacting with someone who's more calm, who's more peaceful, which actually also helps them as well. The idea that it's one or the other is just based on this illusion that we are separate, which we know isn't true. We are interdependent, we interact all the time. So we need to include both ourselves and others in the circle of compassion.
On that point about our collective suffering, obviously there are some people who are still very busy going out to work. They're part of the key workforce. Others, though, have had huge disruption and are now at home, possibly feeling somewhat listless or without a sense of drive and purpose. What would you say to those people?
Well, it certainly is a good time, especially if you are at home, to do some inner work, right? For many of us, our ability to do the outer work, which usually keeps us so busy all the time, or going to the pub or whatever it is where we occupy our time, is not really possible anymore. Check out your relationship with yourself. Would you like to maybe work on developing a more supportive, more healthy relationship with yourself? Also, what's been really amazing to me is the increase in family time people are getting. Like right now, I'm looking outside my window and I see a family walking down the street with their dog. And normally, you might see one person out with their dog, but you don't see whole families taking walks together. And you're seeing a lot more of that. Even on Zoom, I've noticed that people are suddenly taking very seriously, okay, let's have a family Zoom meeting. That didn't happen a month ago, even though it would have theoretically been possible. But I think part of what's happened with this situation is we all kind of get insight into the truth, which is how fragile life is. Stuff like this can happen at any moment. And it gives us more appreciation for the people we love and the importance of being able to spend time with them. And so really, it is a time when you can put some effort into really asking yourself, what do I value in life? What's meaningful to me?
And how hopeful are you that these shifts, which are leading, as you say, to families spending more time together and people being more willing to look within themselves, how hopeful are you that those changes can remain once the immediacy of the crisis abates?
I really don't know. I mean, I think we aren't going to be the same after this. We don't know how long it's going to last. It could be a couple of years, We don't know how long the economic fallout is going to last. I'm in the United States. I would love for something like universal health care to come out of this. I don't know if it will or not, but whatever happens, it won't be the same. There are some hopeful signs. The problem before is we were so busy. We were constantly on planes and driving and work, and everything was like now. And we couldn't see the bigger picture because we were so focused on rushing around in our lives. It's almost like Mother Earth has said, hey guys, take a pause. And not only for human beings, but also I think it's hard to ignore the fact that the level of pollution and greenhouse gases we are putting into the earth is also slowed as well. And so maybe this is an opportunity for us to take a pause and hopefully think about other ways we want to do things. Whether or not that will happen, I have no idea.
Just thinking about that future, are there recommendations that you would be making to politicians about how we can build a more compassionate world and a more compassionate society?
I've been talking a little bit lately about what I call yang self-compassion. So there's kind of the tender self-compassion, accepting yourself as you are, but there's also an active self-compassion. We need to protect ourselves. So if you're, a woman or part of a discriminated against group, subject to racism or heterosexism or whatever, all these isms out there, part of self-compassion is standing up and trying to make a change in the outer circumstances. So it's not just inner work, it's also trying to take social action to protect yourself and your brothers and sisters, right? And really the thing that ties together all of it, compassion for self, compassion for others, is interdependence, right? And so if you really look at, from a political point of view, I think that politicians who fall into the trap of thinking that we can all be independent and we can just go it alone, in our nation first and, or my political party first, it's just not the way things work. The reality, which I think we're seeing so clearly now, it's kind of unavoidable, is we are interdependent. The whole entire globe is interdependent. If we look at that from the level of resources, even our psychological and emotional state of mind is impacted by others so strongly. And so I think anytime we can make our policies accord with reality, they're going to work a little more effectively. I mean, when you have a policy that doesn't fit reality, like, pretending that global warming doesn't exist, that's a problem. And so it would be my hope that we can use this as a reality check and encourage our politicians to really think about, well, if the reality is interdependent, how can we make our policies work in accord with that reality?
And it can often feel almost as if there's a block towards compassion in some of our leadership at the moment. Have you got any insight into what that's about?
Well, how do I put this? I think some people, prominent politicians, may actually have a personality disorder, which actually prevents them from feeling empathy with others. Well, I guess I'll just say it. I mean, a lot of psychologists in the United States have diagnosed Trump with, narcissistic personality disorder. And in a way, we can have compassion for him. He didn't choose to be born with the brain he's born with, or the social circumstances that led him to have this personality disorder. But, so there's personality factors, certainly, that I think prevent people from having empathy. I also think just power, plain old power, especially in the United States, we are so polarized and people are so desperate to hang on to their power that there's an immediate tendency to make the other the out group. They aren't real, immediately dismiss what they're saying without even giving it like 5 seconds of, well, maybe, it's just, okay, that must be wrong because it's coming from them. And, we can't believe them, otherwise we'll lose our power. And I think that type of polarization really undermines our ability to have empathy or ability to have compassion.
And you talked about the tribalism and the in-groups and the out-groups. And of course, one of the byproducts of that is fear. And I'm wondering about the interplay between fear and the ability to practice compassion.
That's actually a very good point, because one of the things that self-compassion gives you, it makes you feel safe. Sir Paul Gilbert, who's a brilliant scientist on your side of the pond, has talked a lot about the role of self-compassion in activating our safety system, the care system. We even know physiologically it activates the system, the parasympathetic, it makes us feel safe and calm and soothed and cared for. And then so when we can tap into that system in the face of fear, then that means we're more able to make decisions, not from a place of fear, but from a place of safety. So often one of the reasons we do what we do is because we want other people to like us and approve of us, right? So for instance, we might submit to others, or we might conform with others, or go along with the crowd because we want to be accepted and liked. One of the things self-compassion gives you is it makes you less dependent on the approval of others. Because when you approve of yourself and you feel you're worthy, you're more free to act authentically. So there's a lot of research showing that one of the benefits of self-compassion is the ability to be authentic, that your self-worth isn't contingent on the approval of others. And so when you think about it in terms of, do I need to go along with what everyone else is saying, or what my family is saying, or what the group, maybe you can be a little more independently minded if you can meet your own needs for self-worth and don't depend on others so much.
So what's next, Kristin, in the field of self-compassion research?
My new book is called Fierce Self-Compassion, and I'm really interested in how gender socialization has caused so much harm in this world. Because women are allowed to be yin, we're allowed to be soft and nurturing, but if we're strong and powerful, people don't like us, we can't be young. And men, they're allowed to be young, strong and powerful, but they aren't allowed to be yin. If they're tender or, soft, then people make fun of them. And I think it's, you might say, a meta problem that's really messed us up, if I can be unscientific about it, because we aren't healthy, we aren't balanced, and we aren't integrated. And I think if you were to disentangle a lot of the world's problems, some of them come down to the fact that we aren't integrated. We can't see these two essential types of ways of being in the world, and that causes problems.
We're just going to take a slight change of focus now, Kristin. Can you tell us the one thing you struggled with most during the lockdown, and what has been your coping strategy?
I'm here with my 18-year-old son, and I'm fortunate in that he is a blessing. He is so sweet. He is so positive. He doesn't cause me any tension at all. And I know some other people with their kids having a little more struggle with that experience. But nonetheless, it's hard. I love my son, but it's also nice to see friends and interact with other people. And so I think that is perhaps the most challenging part of this. But, I have been contacting my friends more, I've noticed, than even I did before. I've been taking it more seriously, making sure I call my brother and, everyone like that. So I think just paying attention to making sure my needs for friendship and social interaction are met in one way or another.
Finally, Kristin, if there was one message you could leave our listeners with, or one action that they could each take, what would it be?
So I would say in this time of crisis, just take a little bit of time out to check in with yourself and see what's troubling you, right? And so, for instance, you can't change the outer circumstances, but there may be a way that you can kind of validate your own struggle, that you can remind yourself that it's shared, and you can bring kindness to yourself. So really, just asking yourself, what do I need in this moment? And can I give it to myself in some way or another? Again, you can't meet all your needs, absolutely, but there's actually a remarkable level to which we can meet our emotional needs, our needs for feeling valuable, for feeling cared for feeling supported, encouraged. And so really take a moment to actually tap into that resource. It's more powerful than you may realize.
And a huge thank you to Kristin Neff for taking the time to talk to us about life beyond COVID. And next time, in the final episode of this series, we'll be talking to Professor Danny Dorling about his latest book, Slow Down, The End of the Great Acceleration, and why it's good for the planet, the economy, and our lives. We hope you will join us then. Beyond COVID is part of the Real Agenda Network, produced by Kitty Horlick and brought to you by Compassion in Politics. We'd love to hear from you, so please do get in touch with any comments or feedback. You can find us online at compassioninpolitics.com. And of course, we'd also love you to subscribe and spread the word about the podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or any of your other favourite podcast providers by searching for Compassion in Politics. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to being back with you again soon.